Thank you, Dr. Barker. I'm happy to be here, and thank you all for joining me. And I have to admit that I was a bit thrown when I was asked to speak about courage as part of this lecture series, because the example Dr. Barker gave me was COVID, being a physician during COVID. However, I am a dermatologist, and so I am not in the ICU or the ER. Certainly did take care of patients during COVID, but we did the best we could remotely. So we can do a lot by photography. And so we saw photos and diagnosed patients with diseases and made recommendations, and things went well during the pandemic. But as I thought about courage, I realized that there are multiple types of courage, and that's what we're going to talk about today. And I think we all need courage, and whether you recognize it or not in your situation, there's a type of courage that keeps us moving and keeps us going. And we'll talk about resilient courage and its role in life, learning, and livelihood. So thanks again, as always, to Gordon College, the Center for Faith and Inquiry, the John Templeton Foundation, as well as Robert Herman, my pre-med advisor, and one of the reasons why I'm a physician today. So I'll start with a quote by Maya Angelou, one of my wife's favorite authors, on the importance of courage. First of all, whether courage really matters. So she said that courage is the most important of the virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. You can practice any virtue erratically, but nothing consistently without courage. And that's true, and that's echoed by a quote in Aristotle we'll cover a little bit later. But today, first we'll talk about how we define courage, and the types of courage, and then talk about examples of individuals with courage, both biblical and modern, and then how we can apply resilient courage in our own lives. And I'll use some examples from my life as a scientist. Mark Twain said that courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear, not absence of fear. And this is a recurring theme. As I learned a lot from this lecture as I prepared it, actually. And I think that this is a recurring theme that is echoed many times, that many times we assume courage is not having fear, and that being brave is not being afraid. And that's absolutely not true. It's the mastery of fear, despite having fear. Well, I'll take you to the Wizard of Oz, where the wizard told the Cowardly Lion, "You have plenty of courage, I'm sure. All you need is confidence in yourself. There's no living thing that is not afraid when it faces danger." That's a key point that I want to make here. Being afraid is not a problem. It is absolutely natural. The true courage is in facing danger when you are afraid, and that kind of courage you have in plenty. And Daniel Putman, a psychologist, kind of summarized the ideal courage. So it's not just a rigid control of fear, nor is it a denial of the emotion. So you don't even need to deny it. The ideal is to judge a situation, accept the emotion as part of the human nature, and use well-developed habits to confront the fear and allow reason to guide our behavior toward a worthwhile goal. The key is to recognize that it's part of life to have fear, to confront it, and to achieve. And Aristotle talked about this. I mentioned that he also mentioned that courage and bravery. Courage is the greatest quality of the mind next to honor. And he talked about the relationship between fear and confidence when thinking about bravery. He mentioned that fear without confidence is cowardice, but confidence without fear is recklessness. And so somehow it's a balance of both that results in bravery. And again, it's not denial of fear. Having fear is important. And so Daniel Putman, again, I kind of liked how he summarized this. This is my own drawing summary of his argument. But the relationship between fear and confidence, again, instead of just a two-directional piece, again, fear without confidence is cowardly. Confidence without fear is foolhardy in his term. But then having significant fear and significant confidence may result in post-traumatic stress syndrome, so PTSD. Having neither fear nor confidence results in hopelessness, and this is an unnatural kind of result of being beat down over and over again. And really, it's the true balance of all that make you brave. So in thinking about what courage is and what it depends on, first, it requires danger. danger of the situation for courage to manifest. It also requires worthiness of the cause. If the cause is unworthy or unimportant, then really courage is unnecessary. And it also requires a perception of one's ability. So if there's danger and it's worthy, but requires no effort or ability, then courage is not manifest either. And then also 4 points to remember when thinking about courage: requires intentionality. So you're not considered courageous if you're forced to do something out of your will. Requires some personal fear. This is a recurring theme that I mentioned. The act must be noble and good, and require some personal risk. And so when we think about courage, these are the points that I like to consider. J.R.R. Tolkien said that heroic or virtuous pagan insistence to do the right thing, even in the face of certain defeat without promise of reward or salvation, is courage. So this is a little bit different than what we might think of when we think of courageous people. We tend to think about physical harm. In this case, it's doing the right thing. And so I'd like to call this integrity courage. Roosevelt also echoed that courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear. So this is just the recurring theme. However, he also said that courage is not having the strength to go on, but going on when you don't have the strength. And so this, again, is a little bit different than physical harm. This is more resilience, going on when you don't have the strength to go on, but making that choice and going on anyway. Thomas Aquinas said something similar, that fortitude or courage is endurance, stand immovable in the midst of dangers, the virtue to remove any obstacle that keeps the will from following reason. And so again, I think this echoes the idea that resilient fear is endurance and patience ongoing. So in summary then, courage can be defined as the choice and willingness to confront agony, pain, danger, uncertainty, or intimidation. Not all physical, right? Some mental courage required here. And so I have summarized this in really 3 points. First, bravery in the face of physical pain, hardship, even death or threat of death. That's a warrior courage. That's the first courage that most of us think of, I think. Number 2, the ability to act rightly in the face of popular opposition, shame, scandal, discouragement, or personal loss. This is the integrity courage that we hinted at earlier. And then finally, fortitude, also courage, includes aspects of perseverance and patience. And this is the resilience or resilient courage. So just some examples in modern life of warrior courage that I came up with. I'm sure that you can come up with many more. When I think of courage, the first thing I think of really is Normandy Beach on D-Day, when our greatest generation landed on the beach, and most of them were killed with the goal of defending our country and our world. This is incredible courage. These young men who were standing in their boat waiting for it to drop down so they could run onto the beach in live fire. The Maasai warrior, I think, also incredibly impressive. Maasai, the tribe of Maasai, young men can't become true men until they've killed a lion. And in fact, there are quotes saying that as you walk through Africa, the Maasai are not afraid of lions in the tall grass. It's the lions that are afraid of the Maasai. And so Maasai warriors, incredible courage, warrior courage. The battle at Thermopylae, I think, if you've heard of it, this is the 300, the Spartans that defended their land through a pass for a period of time against a gigantic army from Persia. Integrity courage, plenty of examples of that. Certainly Martin Luther King Jr. With the integrity to do what was right. The West Point cadet prayer, do the harder right rather than the easier wrong. Also Mother Teresa, who spent her entire life doing the right thing despite hardship. And Abe Lincoln, who, again, at great personal risk, not necessarily physical risk, he was not fighting on the front lines, but making the difficult decisions politically to do the right thing. And then digging in a little deeper with resilient courage, just some examples that came to mind. J.K. Rowling, who of course published the Harry Potter series with incredible success, was a divorced single mother at the time of trying to get the book written and published. She was highly depressed, on welfare. Her mother had recently died from multiple sclerosis, and her book was rejected by all 12 major publishers, yet she pressed on. Albert Einstein didn't speak until he was 4 or read until he was 7. He was told by his teachers that he'd never amount to much. He was expelled from school, denied entry to Zurich Polytechnical Institute, yet persevered. Harriet Tubman, called the Moses of her people. She was the queen of the Underground Railroad, a former slave who helped slaves and had a bounty on her head, had broken her skull in violence, yet pressed on and did the right thing. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, of course, and had over 1,000 other patents. But he mentioned that he failed 10,000 times trying to create the light bulb. So that's a lot of attempts. And if he had given up after 9,999, where would we be today? Teachers called him stupid in school. He was fired from his first 2 jobs for not being productive enough. And then I have to end with Sylvester Stallone, a little bit lighthearted, not just because Rocky was resilient, but he was resilient as he was trying to get this movie written and made. He was incredibly poor. His electricity was turned off while he was trying to write this movie and finish it up, and in fact sold his dog. He sold his dog for money to turn the electricity back on. That's resilient courage. And anybody who appreciates Rocky is glad that he went through this resilient requirement. Of course, there's plenty of courage in the Bible, and very specifically, David talked to Solomon, said to be strong and courageous to do the work. Do not be afraid or discouraged. Lord God is with you. He will not fail you nor forsake you until all the work for the service of the temple of the Lord is finished. Not just he's with you now, he will be with you until all the work is complete. Remember that. Plenty of other examples. Be strong and of good courage. Do not fear, for I am with you. Be men of good courage. And so examples of warrior courage in the Bible, again, plenty of those. Joshua, as he went through Canaan and established the land for Israel. David's mighty men and warriors that he assembled to be his closest elite guard. And then not just men, but Jael and Sisera. Sisera had retreated from a battle with the Israelites and found the tent of Jael. She gave him a blanket and promised to tell people that he wasn't around, and then swiftly drove a stake through his temple and let the Israelites know that she had accomplished this. That's pretty hardcore warrior courage. Integrity courage in the Bible, certainly Esther was probably the first that came to mind, and doing the right thing despite significant personal risk. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in refusing to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar's idol and taking the risk that went along with it. Rahab in choosing to help the Israelites in Jericho, lowering the cord and helping the spies to escape. Certainly significant integrity. And then resilient courage. I think of Job in his long suffering, Moses and his patience with the people that he was leading, Hannah and her persistence for a child, and Joseph, who was knocked down many times and kept getting back up. I like to think about some people who maybe had strong courage in one hand but lacked others. So Samson's warrior courage was clear, right, with the jawbone and his ending, knocking down the pillars and fighting a lion directly, but maybe failed in integrity and resilience when you think of his life and the consequences of that. Think about Simon Peter. A bit inconsistent, where he walked on water and then failed to walk on water a bit, but then was rescued again. Arrest of Jesus, he cut off an ear in defense of him. He had warrior courage, but maybe lacked some integrity courage when the time came and he denied Jesus 3 times. And regained that. Jesus, as a kind leader, restored Peter. And so Peter had resilient courage. And of course, the church was founded on him, Simon Peter the Rock. And so we can learn from others in both their successes and their failures. I really like David as an example because he really portrayed all aspects of courage. And so we can kind of anchor our understanding of courage in the Bible on David himself. Of course, probably the most famous warrior courage in the Bible is David and Goliath. David also, as you probably remember, fought a bear and a lion in defense of his sheep, and then led the Israelites through the promised land and really leading from the front. So clearly a warrior, David was. Integrity, courage as well. When he failed to kill Saul, when he had the opportunity, he even felt bad about cutting his skirt, and just to let him know that he was there and chose not to. He also warned his men not to kill Saul, and even punished some who suggested that would be important for them to do. He said, "Judge me, O Lord, for I've walked in my integrity. I trusted also in the Lord, therefore I shall not slide." Now, many of you may also say, well, David had his failures, of course. So I think rather than not talk about David with all of his failures, I think it's important to talk about his resilience in spite of those. He was a man after God's own heart, even after all of the failures. He was resilient when he was fleeing from Saul after repeated attacks. He kept showing up with his harp, despite getting spears thrown at him and being hunted down from this man. He endured a 3-day plague and the plague of his people, and actually begged God to rain down his judgment on David himself rather than the people. This was after he failed God by taking a census that was not permitted. Of course, David endured the death of his son through Bathsheba after another of his failures, of course, but he accepted that failure and the consequence of that. And then Absalom's rebellion. He was actually hunted by his own son and failed to kill him. But again, showing many failures of David, but he always got back up, and is now in the lineage of Jesus and someone we think of in terms of his courage. So I'll go now to a quote by J.K. Rowling. Again, she kind of has some right to talk about resilience. She said, "It's impossible to live without failing at something." Again, we learned that from David with his many failures. Impossible to live without failing at something unless you live so cautiously that you might as well not have lived at all, in which case you have failed by default. I'm not sure if you know where I'm going with this. Here's a batter in baseball. And I just want to kind of remind everybody and make clear, it's tough to be a hitter in baseball. So first I'll show Larry Bird, one of my favorite basketball players. His free throw percentage was 89%. Jump shot, field goal percentage was 50%. Even three-pointer, he was 38%. That's incredible success for a very clearly very good basketball player. Adam Vinatieri, 98% extra point, or point after the touchdown success, 84% field goal success. Even Tom Brady in passing percentage is 64%. Not even Tom Brady, but even a passing percentage, which is a difficult thing to do. 64%. Apologies for using Adam Vinatieri and Tom Brady. It's still smarts a bit. And then David Ortiz, one of the greatest hitters of all time, 29% success rate at the plate. So hitting 290 at the end of his career. Even Ted Williams in his best year was 44% successful. It's tough for this to be your career, where being successful 30% of the time is incredible success. And so this being a hitter in baseball means failing 70% of the time. But carrying on despite that and being resilient and getting back up at the plate. So now what does this have to do with science? I'm a scientist. We're talking about faith in science. And actually failure is the norm in science. So back to Thomas Edison. Even though I said he failed 10,000 times, he said he didn't fail 10,000 times. He said, "I've not failed once. I've succeeded in proving that those 10,000 ways will not work. When I've eliminated the ways that will not work, I will find the way that will work." And this is really what's required in science. I'm not sure, I'll show a slide in just a bit what actually doing science is like. I'm not sure the public appreciates the difficulty of doing science. Carl Sagan said there are many hypotheses in science which are wrong. That's perfectly all right. They're the aperture to finding what is right. Science is a self-correcting process to be accepted. New ideas must survive the most rigorous standards of evidence and scrutiny. So this is just an example. These are the ideas that go through the mind as a scientist. It takes lots of time, lots of ideas in order to generate, in many years, to generate a single coherent publication that makes any sense at all. We report this as a success. We do not typically report the failures. It would take tomes and tomes of paper to do that. The probability of success for a biotech startup, I mentioned, Dr. Barker mentioned here, and I mentioned in my first lecture that I founded a new company. 15% biotech startups are successful. 14% of all drugs that are in clinical trials, they've made it through all the preclinical work, they've actually been given to humans, 14% of those will get FDA approval. It's an incredibly low amount. It's a very difficult thing to do. And then if you take a new drug that is tested at the very beginning, just a new drug that's identified that might be helpful for a disease, and look at the success rate for that, making it to market, it's not even a percentage because it's so low. It's 1 in 5,000. That requires incredible resilience to bring drugs that you see in the pharmacy every day. Failure is so common in science now, there are actually journals that are dedicated to publishing negative data. So here's PLOS Collections, the missing pieces, collection of negative, null, and inconclusive results. Here's a journal of negative results in biomedicine. And I put COVID-19 here, not because we're wrong about COVID-19, but the public has really been given an insight during this pandemic into how science progresses. So science is, as mentioned earlier, a self-correcting process where we make a hypothesis, we see some indication that hypothesis may be right, we pursue that hypothesis, we continue to test it, and occasionally we find, we're on the wrong track, either completely or just partially, where we redirect that hypothesis. So a lot of times now, from the news, you're getting recommendations that sound contradictory to what you heard months ago. And this is just part of science. You know, and essentially we're making the best guesses that we can for now, and we will correct it as soon as we have more information and as soon as we can. We ask for your patience as you watch science unfold before your eyes during a pandemic. Most of the time, these self-corrections occur before it ever makes the news and you hear a more coherent story in the end. But the importance of COVID-19 and limiting its spread is so significant that you're hearing science in real time. All right, so this is a slide that it's actually one of my favorite cartoons about what it's like to do science. And this is, I don't know if you're on social media when public perception of X versus the reality of X was coming out. There were a lot of these. And this again, it just resonated with me. And so I like to show it. So the public perception of science is that we start by wondering, you know, we start thinking, we have a problem that we want to solve. We accept that challenge accepted. Of course, we have to go read about it and think about it and design experiments. We do the experiments. It's not always easy, but we work really hard. And eventually we win the Nobel Prize. Essentially, that's the goal of all scientists, right? And the public perception of what we do. Here's what actually happens. So yeah, we start by wondering. We accept the challenge, yes. We start to read about it and we do science and we come up with ideas. But before we come up with anything valuable, a lot of things happen. So yeah, we actually find out that somebody already did it. And we go back to square one. We start doing science again. One of the instrument breaks. Yeah, of course. And you can hear expletives if you're around at the time. Things aren't going quite right. That could be good. It could be bad. It could be because Melvin deleted the calibration, and then you have to start all over again, go back to read and begin again. Sometimes you see amazing results, which is fantastic, and then the results turn out to be absolutely nothing, and then more expletives. So then you try to figure out what's happening. You do a lot of thinking. You may progress and say, well, that's interesting, and say, hey, this makes sense. This exact thing has happened to me before. Hey, this makes sense. Wait, no, it doesn't, and then go back to the beginning. And occasionally something makes sense. It's surprising. You can publish it. And then when that happens, you go right back to the beginning and start all over again. This is science and reality. It is a hard field. It is not for the faint of heart. Really, resilient courage is required every single day to move forward. I like to tell people who are thinking about going into science, look, you have to be able to do experiments that give you absolutely no data and that are disappointing for, say, 6 months, so that when you do an experiment and you actually get an interesting result that turns out to be real, that has to be so exciting for you, it carries you through the next 6 to 12 months of negative data again. This is the life of a scientist. It is difficult. So we always love to talk about our successes. That's what you'll hear about in a talk like this. We talk about publications, we talk about awards, we communicate successful clinical trials as we've done. And starting a new company, all those things are successful. I can give probably, I have given a 10 to 15 minute lecture of all these successes. And then noting that took 15 years of work. So it's a little depressing to give a 15-minute lecture about 15 years of work, but it's the reality. But in spite of all these successes, where are the failures? We tend not to talk about the failures, right? Number one, we don't have time. Number two, they're boring. Number three, you don't want to hear about them. But number four, they're frankly embarrassing. And so we don't always talk about our failures. I love this. So this is Johannes Haushofer, who published a CV of failures. This is online. You can find this. Princeton professor's CV of failures, something we should all learn from. So I actually went online and read his CV. He said, started out, most of what I try fails, but these failures are often invisible. And this publication of his failures is an attempt to balance the record and provide some perspective. He talks about the fact that he wasn't the first one with this idea. But his whole CV reads like this: degree programs I did not get into, and et cetera. So he also talks about his meta failure at the end of his CV. And that's the fact that the darn CV of failures has received way more attention than my entire body of academic work. And so the life of a scientist, and we need to admit failures more often. So here I go. Here's a timeline of some of our publications and starting the new company and the funding that I received to make this happen. This all looks very neat and tidy. I started with some fellowships and a grant and a career development award from a foundation, some grants to help me repay my loans from the NIH, a career development award from the NIH. I got a Stiefel award from the foundation that allowed us to create the data and the foundation for supporting our new company that wasn't even an NIH funded research. I got an R01. This is really the bread and butter of a scientist is R01 funding from an NIH, and R61, R33, which is about the same size as an R01, a little bit shorter. So this looks good. It looks, if I looked at this, I would have said, this is fantastic. This is going to allow me to do my science. I got promoted. I got tenure. Published a number of papers. This is all great. What I don't show, though, and I am now, is that it took 8 attempts to get this first R01. And if you've never written an R01, and I assume most of you have not, you might not appreciate that each R01 application is 50 to 100 or more pages, and that takes months to write. So 8 times I wrote a grant that took months to write each time. This was painful. And I have to say, after my 7th failed R01 application, I gave up. I literally gave up. I walked into my home, talked to my wife, Melissa, and told her, great news. I'm going to quit being a scientist. I thought I was a scientist. Evidently, I'm not. I failed 7 times. I can't try 100 times. I have to quit at some point. So I will become a dermatologist. I will, not be working weekends anymore. We'll take a lot of vacations. She said, I couldn't live with you if you weren't doing science. To her credit, she said, you will submit an 8th application and you will keep trying until you get funded, because I know you and you'll be miserable if you're not doing science. I thank the Lord that she made me do that. Because it was the 8th that was funded. My program officer at the NIH used some expletives when I told him I was quitting, and he said that I wasn't, and then I'd have to submit an 8th. And thank God that I did. And so then it was this funded R01. I've certainly had many failures after this, but this is what allowed me to proceed as an independent scientist. These are just some of the things I told you, the clinical trials that came from these papers, and one that's successful I talked about in my first lecture. Again, this award that wasn't even from the NIH that led to founding a company. So here are my NIH funding challenges. Here are my, these are the scores that you get from the NIH when you submit grants. These are my actual grants, starting in 2013, when I got this plus grade. Sounds really good, right? That just means that it was so bad that they didn't even discuss it. It was in the bottom half of all submissions, and so they didn't even bother. My next one, I got a score. I got 38th percentile. Sounds decent. I had to be 17th percentile to get funded, so this wasn't really close. Next one, I got closer, so I was kind of getting excited. I was like, all right, well, not discussed, then 38, then 31. I'm going in the right direction. Submit another one. That wasn't even discussed. All right, so I got back up and started again. 28th percentile. This is great. Best score I ever got. Next one, 40th percentile. Took me back. Then I was going the wrong direction. 43rd percentile. All right, finally the 8th one gets 2nd percentile. I get funded. I'm able to become an independent scientist. At this point, I figure, well, I know how to write grants now. Now we'll be all set. I submit another one, not discussed. Submit another one, similar impact score, so similar percentile. This one gets funded. Submit another one, 39th percentile. The latest one, not discussed. This is the life of a scientist. This is failure. This is requiring resilience to get up every day and keep going. All right, I've had manuscripts rejected by fantastic journals, Cell, Science, Nature Medicine, Nature Immunology, Science Immunology, Immunity, Science Translational Medicine. So lots of failures there. And I started a new company, founded a new company with Medici as funders. They gave us $18 million of Series A startup. But I spent a year and a half talking to many others. Morningside, who is actually was founded by a Christian gentleman, Francis Chan, and fantastic entrepreneur. Atlas Venture, AbbVie Ventures, 5AM Ventures, talked to a lot of these people, and thought we were almost there, found out in the end that they weren't interested anymore. Finally, Medici picked it up, and we had success. So what happens when you fail? And so I thought back to David. What was he doing during his many failures and difficulty when he was down? And in 1 Samuel, it said, when David was being chased by Saul, he departed from there, escaped to the cave of Adullam. And in this cave, this is the cave of Adullam, he was down. It was very clear. How long, O Lord? Will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? This does not sound like the king of Israel, in the lineage of Jesus, a man after God's own heart. He was devastated, right? And it tells us that this is okay. It's okay to feel this way. But further in the psalm, he then says, but I have trusted in your mercy. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. And you know what? We can all say this. We have all received his mercy. We have all received his salvation if you have asked for it. We can all sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with us. And so I think that this is the beginning. This is the beginning of resilience. This is how you come back and how you bounce. Prayer should be a very early approach when you need to rebound. So how do I deal with failures? The first is I'm disappointed and sometimes devastated, and there can be tears, and that's okay. I think that you can take some time to be disappointed in the failure. The next is being in the cave and talking to God about it and telling him, look, I'm really disappointed and I don't know where you're heading with me and why I submitted 7 R01s. I thought that this was my life goal to be a scientist, and maybe it's not. But then to recover and remember to be thankful and remember what you do have and the blessings that we have. Then I've needed my family and my friends. Certainly, again, owe a lot to Melissa, my wife, who kept me going, forced me to keep going, my kids. When that 7th R01 was funded, this is Abby. She met me at the door. She was about 7 years old. And she gave me a hug first when I walked in. And I said, what was that for? And she said, Mom told me that you got a bad grade on your grant. And I know what that's like. And so she wanted to make me feel better. And I'm thankful for that. And that really actually, just that little thing kept me going. Friends, of course, you know, you can talk to them. They've failed. They know you. They're going to bring you back and encourage you and keep you going. Your mentors, you know, they know you as well, and they know what you're going through because they've been through it. They can give you feedback. They can, you know, in science, they can read your grant and they can read the responses and talk about how to get better. And that's important. It's kind of important to recover and keep moving. It's important to get out of bed. You know, that's the first step, right? You got to get your feet out of bed, get them on the floor, get yourself up and start your daily routine and keep going. That's the first step. And then finally, you got to do the work. You know, get your cup of coffee if that's what's necessary. Get the computer out, start writing again. That's what I had to do. I'll leave you with this. There's just a couple slides left. I would say to be like the tardigrade. This is the cute name of the tardigrade is a water bear. And these are probably one of the most resilient animals on Earth. They're about 0.5 millimeter long. They're found on mountaintops, in the deep sea, and in volcanoes. These things are everywhere. They're from tropical rainforests to the Antarctic. This reminds me of Job a little bit, what happened with Job, with God and Satan's interaction about Job. Essentially, people found out these water bears could handle everything. And look what they threw at them, just to test it, just to see if they could handle it. They were put into outer space and released, and then recaptured and shown that they could survive it. They've been more than boiled at 458 degrees Fahrenheit and survived it. They've been They've been frozen to minus 458 degrees Fahrenheit. That's almost absolute zero, and they survived it. They've been more than boiled to 304 degrees Fahrenheit. They've been given 1,000 times more radiation than humans can survive and survived it. They can handle 6 times the pressure of the deepest ocean, 6,000 atmospheres. They can survive without water for 100 years. These guys are hardcore. These guys are the most resilient creature I've ever heard of in my life. So when you're going through a hard time, think of the tardigrade. Be like the tardigrade. And then finally, how do you exercise this? So what does this mean for you? How can you exercise resilient courage? First, you need to believe in yourself. And the reason is because God does. Others do. They know what you can accomplish. Talk to your friends. Talk to your family. Your parents, talk to your mentors, because they'll help you to believe in yourself again. Accept that you're going to have failures. This is just part of living. This is part of success is having failures. So don't be discouraged in that. Allow yourself to be disappointed. Take a break. Have a Netflix day. But the key is then move on. The Bible tells us there's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. There is a time, but the time is limited and you bounce back. Get out of bed, maintain your routines, start again and strategize how you're going to succeed next time. Take the feedback, learn from that, and redesign and do better. Don't hide your failures, admit them. Maybe give a talk someday about your failures when you're successful. Admit to others. It really encourages them to know that it's not all about success. Look for feedback so you can get better. Don't forget to celebrate your wins. It's very easy to forget that you've had many wins in your life. So sometimes I read my CV over again and I take a look at it and I'm like, wow, that's actually pretty good. If I was looking at this and I didn't know me, I'd think that I'd done some good things. You have to work hard. And that's part of getting out of bed and doing it again and applying yourself. And finally, relationships are not just important, they are critical. Your family will help you to be resilient. Your friends. Encourage others when they need it. Seek encouragement when you need it. Find mentors who know you and will encourage you and help you to get to that next step.